This is Chapters from Out of the Best Books, where we hope to offer up new insights to the curious believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Cole Wissinger. Today we open the pages of a new book called Habits of a Peacemaker, 10 Habits to Change Our Potentially Toxic Conversations into Healthy Dialogues. It's an important handbook for anyone wanting to build bridges of understanding, be more Christlike in conversation, and to take down fear of offense. The author, Stephen Collis, is a professor of the law at the University of Texas and an accomplished public speaker. Each chapter of Habits of a Peacemaker tackles a different habit of a good peacemaker, and today we're going to key in on chapter number 6, habit 6, which is be open to change, which we'll see has great application in our peacemaking in relationships, whether they be personal or professional, or our relationship with God.
Years ago, newlyweds Mark and Tracy moved into their one-bed, one-bath apartment. This story is true and shared with their permission, but I'm changing their names to protect their identities. You'll see why soon. They were young, in their early 20s, still in college, so neither had lived before in a place where they needed to worry about the maintenance of appliances or fixtures around the house. Their parents had tried to teach them, but, as with most young people, Mark and Tracy had only absorbed a fraction of the lessons their parents had tried to pass on. When they moved into their new place, Mark had been adamant that they not have a plunger in the house. He was a bit of a germaphobe and found plungers disgusting. He didn't want one around, and nothing was going to change his mind. Tracy thought it was a bit strange. Her family had always had a plunger around, and they had always made good use of it. But she figured it wasn't worth a fight, so she let it go. One evening, she was in the kitchen cleaning up from dinner. She had not eaten much of her chicken breast that night, so most of it was still left on the plate. Glancing down at the sink, she decided it was too big to shove into the food disposal. Somewhere from the recesses of her mind, she recalled her mother when she was a child telling her that it was okay to sometimes put food down the toilet. Years after this incident, she realizes that whatever she thought her mother had told her, it wasn't that, or it was a very specific situation where putting food in the toilet might have made sense. She walked to the toilet and scraped the chicken off the plate. It slid into the water and nestled into the bottom of the bowl. Tracy didn't hesitate. With 2 fingers, she pushed the flush handle. The chicken vanished into the hole at the bottom, but the water started backing up almost immediately. The bowl filled most of the way, then paused. She instinctively looked to the side of the toilet for the plunger. Nothing. She paused, considering the water, knowing that the chicken breast was lodged somewhere in the pipes. It occurred to her that if she flushed again, it might force the clog down. That must have been what Mark's family did when they faced backups, she figured, since they didn't use plungers. She reached for the flush handle and pushed it again. The increased water in the bowl didn't force down the chicken. Instead, the water rose rapidly. Its surface reached the lip of the bowl within seconds. Tracy had no idea what to do. She fiddled with the flush handle, but that didn't slow the flow. The water spilled over the porcelain. "Mark!" she screamed. Another memory flashed into her mind. Aside from seeing her parents use a plunger as a kid, she recalled her dad tinkering with the back of the toilet. She yanked off the tank lid and dropped it to the floor. Mark appeared at the bathroom door. "What's up?" he said in his normal, soft-spoken voice. Then, when he saw the water flowing over the lip of the bowl and flooding the floor, he raised his voice. "What the—" "We have to shut it off!" Tracy yelled. "Help me!" She pulled the float up and yanked it out from the tank. "What are you doing?" Mark yelled. "The chicken clogged the toilet." "Why is there chicken in the toilet?" Mark said. He stepped in the growing puddle on the floor to join Tracy at the tank. The bathroom was barely big enough to hold both of them. "And why are you yanking stuff out of the tank?" "I'm just trying to stop it." "That's not how you do it." "Then help me. Get out of the way." Tracy backed against the wall and sidestepped to let him pass. He immediately bent to the wall and reached behind the toilet. Tracy watched him turn something. "You have to shut off the water at the valve," he yelled. "It's still flowing out of the toilet," she said after he stood straight. "That's because you ripped the stopper out when you yanked out the float arm." He plunged his arm into the tank and pressed the flapper against the bottom. The water finally slowed. "Well, how was I supposed to know?" Tracy said. "Why were you doing this anyway?" "I thought I could flush chicken down and it got clogged," she said. "Why would you flush chicken down the toilet? Put it in the garbage disposal." "It was too big." "Then put it in the trash can. We need towels." "Hey," Tracy said, yanking a couple of towels off the rack and dropping them into the water. "This only happened because we don't have a plunger." "It happened because you tried to flush an entire chicken down the toilet and then kept flushing until the water overflowed. I wouldn't have kept flushing if we had a plunger." The argument continued for some time. Eventually they fixed the toilet and cleaned up the mess. In case you're worried about it, Mark and Tracy are still married. Tracy understands much better how a toilet works, and that, whatever her mom was teaching her all those years ago, it wasn't to put giant pieces of uneaten food in the toilet. And what is important for our purposes is that Mark changed his mind about having a plunger in the house. They now have one in every bathroom. Although he and Tracy may still quibble over who was at fault in the great toilet fiasco of their first year of marriage, he acknowledges that having one available is probably a good idea. We can all learn from Mark and Tracy. Once we free ourselves from the fiction that anyone who disagrees with us must be a monster or a fool, we need not be so afraid of allowing ourselves to be persuaded. The techniques I have explored so far relate to keeping things civil, even while you may want to persuade someone to come around to your point of view or solve a problem together. But being a peacemaker carries with it important responsibilities, one of which is being willing to change. This is a hard concept for humanity to understand. But recognizing we don't know everything, being willing to learn, seeking the best sources for doing so, asking people honest questions, all of those mean nothing if you're unwilling to ponder the new things you are learning and consider changing your views. In recent years, the Constitution of the United States has endured a veritable barrage of attacks. Certainly it had, and still has, its flaws. I won't dwell on them here, or dive into the debates regarding the attacks on the document, or its effectiveness in establishing the rule of law. For its time, the Constitution was a remarkable achievement. Despite all the weaknesses of the United States, the Constitution remains the longest-lasting document of its kind in history, and it has allowed the United States to thrive and progress even in the face of dramatic challenges. Many of us do not spend much time thinking about how it was written or how the various individuals who helped draft it achieved that goal. It was not easy. Delegates from 13 states arrived in Pennsylvania in sweltering heat, in an era long before air conditioning or bug spray. They represented intensely competing interests. This was not the America we know today, where we enjoy a somewhat common culture despite our geographic differences. These men represented interests, ideologies, and ways of life that made any likelihood of achieving any sort of workable agreement highly unlikely. From all objective evidence, they should not have been able to draft and agree to the Constitution. I will return to this more later, but want to focus on one point in particular now. Legal historian and scholar Derek Webb dove into the history of the Constitution's drafting, not to look for the meaning behind various provisions, but instead to try to understand how these various delegates could have possibly set aside their differences long enough to achieve what they did. By any standard, it was remarkable. As he explains, the delegates devised rules to free the delegates to float new ideas, change their minds, alter course, and flexibly respond to new arguments, evidence, and proposals without fear of recrimination. They agreed not to keep an official record of the votes of individual delegates. George Mason supported the rule because if a record was taken, it would be an obstacle to a change of them on conviction. As Webb explains, if delegates knew their votes were being recorded for posterity, simple pride might very well have prevented them from yielding to new information or better arguments. The second rule was related. All the proceedings were to be secret. Delegates could not publish them in newspapers or write home about them in letters. Finally, the third rule allowed any delegate to move to reconsider any vote that had already been taken. If new ideas presented themselves or new coalitions formed, any member could ask the convention to revisit a topic already discussed and voted on. Think about the effect these three rules had on the convention. No one was watching. No one was waiting with their social media account or smartphone to catch one of the delegates if they changed their mind on a given topic. This made them free, in a way too many of us today are not free. They could change their minds, consider new information, listen to increasingly sophisticated arguments, think through the implications of their decisions and adjust accordingly, and search for the best solutions available. One gem Webb discovered in his research was a remark from James Madison nearly 40 years later, in which he recalled the effects of the rules on the convention. Opinions were so various and at first so crude that it was necessary they should be long debated before any uniform system of opinion could be formed. Meantime, the minds of the members were changing, and much was to be gained by a yielding and accommodating spirit. Had the members committed themselves publicly at first, they would have afterwards supposed consistency required them to maintain their ground, whereas by secret discussion no man felt himself obliged to retain his opinions any longer than he was satisfied of their propriety and truth, and was open to the force of argument. We may not like all the decisions the founders made when drafting the Constitution, but we can learn from the rules they crafted. Retaining the ability to change our minds is a critical practice of peacemakers. Being open to more truth is pointless if we are not willing to allow that truth to affect our thinking. I also want to highlight the biggest impediment the delegates faced to changing their mind, as flagged by Madison. Their concern was that once they had committed themselves publicly, as politicians, it would have been almost impossible for them to change their minds. Then, as now, they would have been accused of inconsistency and flip-flopping. That is a legitimate concern for politicians clamoring for every vote they can get. But here's the key. Most of us are not politicians. Some of those reading this book may be, but for most of us, we do not need to worry about public condemnation or voters being upset that we are pulling the wool over their eyes. For most of us, seeking the truth and being persuaded by it will not lead to career ruin. What it will lead to is progress and dialogue that we allow to be constructive. One of the more remarkable pairings in recent years was found in an opinion piece written by Nadine Strossen, former president of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, and Kristen Wagoner, current president of the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF. The two organizations could not be more different. And on many of the most divisive issues of our day, the two women hold positions that could not be more dissimilar. Abortion, gay rights, schooling, the role of government, constitutional interpretation, gun rights, taxation, affirmative action, immigration. They likely have as many disagreements on those issues and many others as anyone in the country. But one thing they do have in common is a belief that government should not regulate speech except in narrow circumstances. Strawson has written several books about it and has become an important thought leader on the topic. One of her primary theses is that attempts to regulate speech almost always result in harming the very people the regulators are trying to protect. Waggoner has been litigating cases on the issue for many years, including in the United States Supreme Court. Tribalistic instincts shout that these two women should never join forces, that to show they agree on anything would be a betrayal of all the principles on which they disagree. After the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark decision related to free speech in the summer of 2023, the two decided to pen an op-ed together that would explain why the ruling was correct. Almost no major news publisher in the United States would print it, most likely because most of the opinion editors were not happy with its message. Eventually, Bloomberg Law agreed to do so. Waggoner and Strawson's story is important for two reasons. First, it shows us that there are people willing to set aside their groups for principles they know are true. Second, it reflects an unwillingness to do the same by those who run America's major opinion pages, which is a symptom of toxic tribalism. We can all better follow this particular habit of Strawson and Waggoner. I emphasize the term toxic tribalism because not all tribalism is necessarily bad. As Professors Dominic Packer and J. Van Bavel explain in their book, The Power of Us, oftentimes the very human tendency to form and stay loyal to groups is not necessarily a bad thing. Much depends on the nature of the group. For example, human beings regularly align with charities, non-profits, and religious groups to perform much-needed service all over the world. And staying loyal to those groups allows them to achieve much more collectively than any of the individuals involved could have ever achieved on their own. Human beings developed an instinct for tribalism for a reason. It allows for protection, social cohesion, group productivity, and achieving in numbers that which would never be achieved solo. Tribalism by itself is not an inherent negative, and in fact, remaining true to our tribe when our principles demand it is another habit peacemakers regularly employ. Toxic tribalism, however, can be quite problematic. For example, when a tribe adopts the practice of suppressing dissenting voices, or a cult mentality in which members seek only to affirm one another's worldview, tribes can become poisonous. If they adopt a worldview that anyone who is not part of the group is an enemy, it can lead to many of the problems we see in today's modern politics. Strawson and Waggoner's example is important because each woman belongs to a group that arguably includes some people who have adopted a more toxic mentality. But neither woman caved to that mindset. They remain true to their tribe when principle demands it, but are willing to build bridges with others when those same principles demand that. Peacemakers put principle over group affiliation. Consider again our metaphorical marketplace of ideas and pretend that you are in a cloistered tent in which the only people who have entered are those who agree with you. The space is comfortable. You neither see nor hear any threats. The messages are soothing because you agree with them. What would happen the moment an outsider appears and shares ideas that are different from those inside the tent? The most likely result will be discomfort, confusion, anger, and possibly hostility toward the outsider and their ideas. And all of that might pivot onto you if you decide to listen to the outsider. Imagine how much worse it will get if you then decide to follow the outsider out of the tent, even for a moment. Taking that step is uncomfortable. It risks alienating us from those in the tent in which we feel the most secure. It leaves us alone. It can make others in our tent feel betrayed, even if that is not our intent. In short, it is a terrifying step. Yet, it is what peacemakers do all the time. The fear that stems from stepping away from our tribe on a particular issue is very real. The consequences can be real as well. Our tribe might turn on us. Other tribes likely will refuse to accept us. The result is that we may end up standing alone. When you find yourself in that situation, know that standing alone is often the mark of leadership. In an article for the Stanford Social Innovation Review, researchers Jacqueline Novogratz and Ann Welsh McNulty explored what they found to be the single most common characteristic of people who are leaders, who are driven to direct or redirect their lives, to tackle seemingly intractable problems, and to stay true to their values in the face of enormous challenges. That characteristic was moral courage. They defined moral courage as the commitment to act upon one's values regardless of the difficulty or personal cost. At the end of the day, peacemakers are leaders. They acknowledge how little they know. They seek truth and knowledge from a variety of sources. They listen and ask questions of those with whom they disagree. They are willing to change their minds, and when they finally do reach a conclusion on a particular issue, they stand up for it, even if it means standing alone. Do not fear to concede reality. If fear of our tribe turning on us were all we faced, we might be able to overcome it. Sadly, other terrors lurk in the night. One of the most common is the worry that if we concede a proven reality, it might undermine our deeply cherished positions. This often leads to individuals taking absurd positions, even when all the evidence proves them wrong. That, in turn, leads to them losing credibility or resorting to gaslighting to avoid discussing proven realities. We do not need to do this. It may be our natural tendency because we're fearful that acknowledging certain facts may prove that our preferred positions are wrong. But peacemakers overcome that fear. Do not be afraid of truth. If someone proves a fact that you know in your heart is correct, concede that it is true. Then engage in whether it is a fact that matters. If it does, be willing to consider changing your mind. If it does not, explain why. But don't lower the level of discourse or make yourself appear to be a fool by denying reality. Taking that road will lead you nowhere.
That was an excerpt from Chapter 6, Be Open to Change, which is habit number 6 in Stephen Collis' new book, Habits of a Peacemaker, 10 Habits to Change Our Potentially Toxic Conversations into Healthy Dialogues. Stephen Collis offers up empowering information that will help improve your everyday interactions and heal relationships. To hear some of the behind-the-scenes stories from the writing of this book and to learn a little of where Stephen comes from, you can go check out our most recent podcast episode, which has an interview with the author. Be Open to Change is just one of Stephen Collis' 10 Habits of a Peacemaker. To hear the other 9, with his anecdotes and practical application, you can pick up Habits of a Peacemaker at your local Deseret bookstore, or sign up for a free trial of Deseret Bookshelf Plus today, where you can access this book in its entirety, as well as other ebooks, audiobooks, and podcasts. Tune in next time as we open the pages of another great work from the Deseret Book Library on Out of the Best Books.